Welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. Today, Stephen and I are going to explore Eckhart Tolle's life-changing insight. And this is an insight that, and even the way it's expressed in his book, The Power of Now, is very much akin to the language that Stephen and I use that really resonates with our own personal experience. So we both have a great affinity for Eckhart's book, The Power of Now. And so let's begin with just going through a bit of the introduction to this book, just kind of skimming through for highlights where he talks about this life-changing event that he went through. And this was, he says, in his 30th year. So he was 30 years old. And he says up until that point, he had lived in a state of almost continuous anxiety and depression. And he was at a point in his life where he was really kind of wondering, what's the point of living? He just had lost his zest for life, and he just felt life was kind of a burden of misery. So, and he had this moment, this aha moment where he woke up. Let's see. One night he woke up in the early hours. So he woke up in the early morning, and he had this thought. And here was the thought in his words: I cannot live with myself any longer. So I cannot live with myself any longer. And as he pondered that thought, he thought it's really a very strange thought. He says he wondered if he was two different things, and I and myself, and he wondered if one of them was maybe not true. And as he pondered that thought, he says that it stopped his mind. So his mind became completely quiet, and he felt like he was drawn into a vortex of energy. And then, as if he was falling into a void, and then he lost consciousness. And when he woke up, he had this feeling of just deep peacefulness. And also, he felt this vibrancy and clarity to all of life. It had like this diamond-like crystal clarity to it. And he describes how for the next couple years, he kind of walked through life in this state of deep peace and bliss. And he realized that nothing he ever did or could do could add anything to what he already had. And as he continued to contemplate this and live with and from this awareness, he started to understand what might have happened on that night. That somehow this unhappy and deeply fearful self was ultimately a fiction of his mind. So his self-image, his self-concept, he realized was a fiction. And in that moment, that identity collapsed. As he described it, it's like it went into a void. And then what was left was his true nature, the ever-present I am, consciousness in its pure state prior to identification with form. So just beautifully described in the introduction to that book. And if you haven't read The Power of Now, it's a must read. So that's what we want to go into today. What is this shift that he experienced, and how through spiritual practice can we point to that experience so that you can have that experience as well? And in traditional spiritual practice, there's a number of different inquiries and practices that go directly at this, that point directly at this shift where the fabricated self, the self-image, the self in the mind, kind of realizes that the mind realizes, or something realizes, that oh, that's just not true. That's a fiction. That's just made up in my mind. And as that is released, then this inner essence of who we are shines forth and is self-evident. So one of the practices is called neti neti, where it's you go through with you kind of take an inventory of your self-image. So you go through, and you can kind of do this in your own way, in your own mind now with me, is so go through and think of, if you are asked the question, so say you're at a cocktail party or at a business interview and somebody says, well, who are you? So you might go through and you might list, well, they're seeing you so they can see your gender and your height and your physical characteristics. But in your mind, you might identify those as who you are, as this particular body with these particular physical characteristics. You also might identify with ways you think and what you believe, with roles that you play. So just think for a moment about all the different ways you identify who you are and the ways you might describe that to someone else. That if you start to look at those and inquire into if those are really who you are, you find, well, if you changed from one belief to another, would that change who you are? If you are identified with your body, and your body is changing every moment and your cells are renewing every moment, can you say that you're the same body? You're a different, in effect, you're a different body every moment, right? So there's something, though, that continues through all those changing characteristics of the body. So you grow up from a wee one to an old one, and your body is always changing. And so yet there's something that seems to endure through all of that. There's something underneath the body that you call yourself, you call I, you're referring to as I. So in neti neti, you go through and say, well, really, I'm not my beliefs, because when I learn something new, I might have a new belief, but do I say that I'm a different person? No, I don't. Same with feelings. You may be strongly identified, as Eckhart was, with feelings of anxiety or depression. You might kind of feel like that is who I am, but feelings are changing too. Do you think when you go from anxious to depressed, you're a different person? No, you don't. There's something else that is enduring underneath those changing emotions, underneath those changing thoughts. And you can go through, say, your roles, right? Or your occupation. If you change your occupation, are you now a different person? No, but you might identify strongly with the occupation that you have, but ultimately it isn't self-defining. It's not who you are. The same with roles you play. So you may really identify as being a parent or being a friend. Likewise, all those roles are ever changing. Yet there's something that endures through that, underneath all of that. So in neti neti practice, you kind of go through and you start discarding this thing that you identify with, and that thing, and this thought, and that belief, and this emotion, and that, and this habit. Maybe you identify with habits, or maybe you identify with, I like to work out. So you might identify with being in shape, or you might meditate and identify with being a meditator. Whatever, any skill set you have, you might identify with that. So in neti neti, you go through and you realize, well, yeah, those are things I do, those are roles I engage in, but that's not who I am. So neti neti is really kind of debunking each one of those ways that you identify. That aside. the self-inquiry practice last week, where we set aside all these things one by one until we arrive at a felt sense that is different, that is qualitatively a different sense of who we are. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Stephen, and Stephen's going to guide us more experientially into this sort of felt sense that can only be pointed to in words, but can be experienced directly, pointed to directly. So Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was explained so beautifully that I almost felt I didn't need to do any further, because you're right. You point to it, but there are literally no words to describe it. So I just thought we'd do something very short and simple, very much in Eckhart Tolle's style, to help you understand how to get to that point where there's still that question, who am I? But then the answer is not in words, and the answer is more in the sense of presence, felt presence. So you can do this open-eyed or closed eyes, because we often think that we have to do meditation a particular way, but that's also a story that we're telling ourselves, or it's a particular way of thinking about things that's not necessarily true. So it's quite wonderful to realize, oh, of course I can meditate with my eyes open when I'm going about my day. So I can do this at any time. So as Kevin was saying, this power of meditation and awareness, when we are meditating, as many of you are accustomed to do that, and for those of you listening, I really want to welcome you to this beautiful podcast that Kevin and I do, because we really honor the fact that many of you come here with all kinds of different experience. So here in this meditation, we're looking at meditation as thoughtless awareness. So where there is awareness without thought. And what does that mean? What does that mean if you put all these things aside, just as Kevin was guiding you, neti, that you're not just doing that with roles, and you're not just doing that with the things that you have thought you were, but you also do it with your thoughts and feelings and so on. So you can be in this sense of presence at any time, right? Which is the importance of understanding that meditation is not just when you close your eyes and you sit down for 10 or 15 minutes in your morning. Meditation is an all-day event, and it's not an event either. It is an all-day awareness. And that's what Kevin and I are constantly bringing you to, is simply this. So in this practice, you don't have to be a person who's carrying around roles and descriptions of themselves and a mind that's filled with lots and lots of thoughts and stories about yourself. There's a whole nother way of being, and that's presence. So that's true meditation itself, exactly what Eckhart Tolle was talking about. So even as we're speaking together here, because this is very much a dialogue, it's not me necessarily instructing you, nor is it Kevin telling you to be a particular way. You're actually inquiring. You can be presence, because in fact there is nothing to think about. And as many teachers over the years have said, and Eckhart Tolle says the same thing, it's so simple that there's actually nothing to figure out with thought. And this is exactly what Kevin was pointing to. If you try to get there by thinking about it, then in fact you're doing exactly the same thing as you would with roles. You're trying to create something out of thought. But here there's nothing to figure out. So you might wonder, well, what's going on? How do I get at something without thought? So actually stepping out of thinking, and just like Eckhart Tolle did, and just as Kevin was describing, it doesn't involve us understanding something through further thought. So some of you might think, oh, well, hang on, I've given years and years of education to cultivating this thinking. What on earth does this mean? I thought thinking was the highest faculty that a human being could have. But here, this is really turning everything upside down and just saying that you are not a thinking entity and you are not your thoughts. So once you discover that, you start to touch a dimension in yourself that's beyond thinking. And this is quite revolutionary if you're listening to this. What? Something beyond thought. Something that's more important than words. So you might be feeling this already because you're exploring with Kevin and I. We're simply guiding you into what lies beyond thoughts, what lies beyond words, what's behind the words. Now, if you've listened to Kevin and I speak before, we speak about it in different ways. Sometimes we might call it spaciousness, spacious awareness. Sometimes we call it stillness. So simply, it doesn't matter what you call it because they're just words, but you can become more aware of spaciousness than words. And the spaciousness, who's feeling the spaciousness? It's within you. So you might have already noticed your thinking is starting to vanish, or there's more space. I'm also creating more space between my words for you. So there's just this gentle presence in the space. Now, our mind has such a strong habit of wanting to interfere and say, what's going on? And pull you out of this presence, this power of now. So I want you to allow your body to participate so that every cell of your body becomes present. Now, somebody might say, what does that mean? What does every cell being present mean? Well, it's actually very simple. Sense the aliveness in your body, wherever you feel it. Kevin and I guide you a lot to feel it in your feet. So wherever you can feel it first is fine. It might be the feet. You might feel that aliveness, that presence of your feet grounded. Or you might feel spaciousness in your hands. Or you might feel a stillness or a clarity in the uprightness of your spine. Wherever you feel that aliveness now, see if you can bring that aliveness, for example, if it's spaciousness in your hands, see if you can bring it into your entire energy field so that it actually saturates your body. And your body becomes part of presence. Now, as you're doing this, you might feel, oh, but there's a me that's observing this inner body feeling. But the more and more you go into this with depth, you realize there's no longer this subject-object relationship between you and the presence and the feeling of the inner body. The feeling of the inner body actually merges with presence. There's a merging of the observer and the observed, so there just remains I. The entire being becomes aware, peaceful. If thinking comes, that's okay. It doesn't come so easily anymore. What you're going to have for breakfast or what you did last week. those things, they come now because I've mentioned them. They can just come and abide and dissolve. So there's more spaciousness, presence. Just rest in that presence. As you sit here, your entire body is present, is meditating. You can do it at any time throughout your day, just simply by finding the felt sensation of presence in your feet or hands or spine or some other part of your body, and feeling it in every cell of your body and sitting for a minute, perhaps. Now we can ask exactly as Kevin proposed, who am I? Just go deeply into it. Just see what happens. And the answer is not in words. That's exactly what Kevin's proposed. That's exactly what Eckhart Tolle proposes and what Ramana Maharshi proposed. Let's see if the answer comes. You need, of course, to be very still, alert, awake. So that you can find out after the question has been asked. And you can't think about it. It's not answered through words. Don't try to find the answer through thinking. Who am I? Ah, you're still alert. What remains is this alert, still spaciousness, consciousness. You don't own it. It's not yours. It's consciousness minus all content and form. Who am I? You might be right on the point of, I don't know. Not knowing, the unknowing, and being able to rest in the presence of the unknowing. Because it's not through words or concepts. So on the level of words, you'd say, I don't know. And yet, without words, there is, without a doubt, presence. No past, no future, no content, no identity, no name, no form. What's present is formless, wordless, vastness, intangible spaciousness. And it's not outer, it's simply inner, spacious presence. Even those words describe something. This is within you. No content, no form. Vast presence. Just rest for one last moment in this limitless knowing. If your eyes are closed, slowly open them in presence. And if they're already open, continue in presence. Bring presence into your day. Bring the awareness of now, the freshness and wonder of every moment, the unbound flow of knowing in every moment into your day. Kevin, thank you always for your pristine guidance, and everybody listening for the wonderful presence that you bring to.
Thank you, Stephen, for that beautiful guidance. Thank you all for joining with us and for connecting with that dimensionless, formless, contentless, seeming space that is not a space, and that mysteriously and miraculously all of this arises out of. So there's no separation. There's no going somewhere else and coming back to here, to this body. This body, this consciousness is a movement of that. If you'd like more information on meditation and awareness practices like this, you can visit raisingourvibration.net, and we'd love to hear from you there. Until next time, bye for now.